Hello, welcome back to City Planner Plays, where we are creating the ultimate beginner's guide to city skylines by creating the city of Tutoria. And in this episode, we are introducing our final DLC, the Natural Disasters DLC. Now, this is a very controversial DLC. People either love or hate it. And if you watched my DLC review video from about a year ago, I had a visceral take on this that I don't like it as much as the other DLCs. Now, since I've gone through and created this series, I've changed my opinion a little bit about it. It's not just about disasters. You get a number of really unique buildings with this DLC, and the ability to introduce a whole new type of planning to the game, that's natural disaster planning. That's an actual field, and this is one of the only DLCs that introduces a new field, not just a zoning variation or some sort of transit option or a season. It introduces a whole new field of planning, which is actually really exciting. But beyond that, it also introduces some endgame content, which the game is kind of lacking. Let's be honest. If I didn't have disasters on, I could basically take this city and let it run overnight, and nothing bad will happen. I'll wake up and I'll have 30 million or 40 million in the bank. Everything will be fine. With disasters, you can't do that if you have disasters enabled. So the very first thing I'm going to do is show you how to not enable disasters. So if you come into here and you go into gameplay, you have an option right here. If you don't want random disasters to occur, turn this off. If you do want them to occur and you want to set their frequency, there's a slider here. Right here's maximum. You'll get disasters all the time. In my most recent stream for Verde Beach, I asked you how you wanted this set, and 50 came out to be the winning percentage. I had 2 disasters occur in 2 hours. If you don't want that many, but you want to keep disasters on, for Verde Beach, for instance, I keep it to about right here. So we have lots of fires, but some of the more extreme disasters happen infrequently. And then, if you want to completely avoid that, and you don't want the fires, because that will be a thing. If you've watched Verde Beach, you'll know I have lots of fires. One of the reasons for that is I do not disable fire spreading. So disabling fire spreading will make it so that you can't have a forest fire. Basically, one tree will light on fire and it won't jump to the next. If you have this off, which is the default if you have disasters on, you can't change it. What ends up happening is you can have a massive forest fire unless you have the right service buildings in your community and they're within proximity of the fire. So I wanted to explain that right off the bat because that can help mitigate some of the disasters that you will receive. And there are a number of them. If you come into the landscaping and disasters menu, a new name for it, and you go over here to disasters, you'll see that we have 7 new disaster types. We have a tornado, which will spawn a tornado that can go all the way across your map. An earthquake, which will not just cause an earthquake that destroys buildings, but potentially leave an earthquake scar. A sinkhole, which will create a massive sinkhole in your city. It can destroy infrastructure, and it can destroy buildings and roads. Thunderstorms, which will basically strike your power lines and wreak havoc on your power line system and create forest fires. Forest fires, which are what they sound like. Collapse, which is where buildings can just collapse. Fires, which are fires. Tsunamis, which will occur from the water. They'll come out and you'll have a massive wave hit your city. And then meteor strikes. And one important thing to recognize is that you could have a meteor strike hit the water and create a tsunami. During a thunderstorm, there might be a tsunami. You could have an earthquake that leads to a tsunami. You could have these chained together. And from this menu, I could create my own disaster if I wanted to, or I could just wait for them to occur naturally. Now, today we're not going to unleash hellfire on the city. In the next episode we will. Today we're going to focus on preparing for these disasters. So what I'm going to do is come into our menu over here, and I'm going to disable random disasters. We'll leave fire spreading on. That's fine. We can deal with that. That's a relatively small thing to deal with. So we've unlocked, we get a number of buildings that we can use to mitigate the impacts of the disasters. So if you come into your emergency services menu, you'll notice a new disaster services option. So we have things like the disaster response unit, which searches buildings for survivors after a disaster. We have small and large emergency shelters. So these have a weekly upkeep. They will take in resources and store them for a disaster, and you can evacuate your citizens to these buildings. They have different numbers of buses, and the shelter capacity is different. So depending on the size of your community, you're going to want to consider having these in there. Now, it's obviously more efficient to have a larger facility. If you just look at the upkeep, this one is 480 monies per week with a capacity of 1,000. This one is approximately 5.5 times that, but the capacity is 10 times. So things to keep in mind. We also have radio masts, which inform the citizens of a disaster that's coming. That said, these are hindered by terrain, so something to keep in mind. We have earthquake sensors. These are unique buildings because they can sense an earthquake before it's coming, but people will often use them to jump power as well and use them like some sort of electrical transmission area. So it's a neat thing to have in the city, even if you are playing without disasters. Tsunami warning buoys, you put those out in the water and they'll tell you when a tsunami is coming. The weather radar will tell you when thunderstorms are going to occur and tornadoes. And then we have the deep space radar, which helps you figure out when meteors are going to strike. So all of these are going to be important to some degree in our community. But beyond that, we also get helicopters. So when you come into your fire department menu, you'll also see that we have this fire helicopter depot and a fire watchtower. Same thing here in healthcare. You also get a medical helicopter depot. And under police stations, you also have a police helicopter depot. So this can be really helpful if you're creating a remote village or you just want enhanced coverage in your community. So all very interesting things. And we get a couple of other things that are pretty interesting as well. Now these aren't related to disasters, which makes them a curious inclusion into this, but I still appreciate them anyway. So we get the tank reservoir, which helps you store some of your excess water capacity. And if you start to run low, it'll take water from these tank reservoirs, which can be really helpful if you're on the edge. And then you have this freshwater outlet, which is a vanilla way of creating your own rivers or ponds. It's really fun. We're going to create a pond today. And then we have the pumping service, which can be useful if you're terraforming because it helps pump some of the water out. It can also help if you have a tsunami, get the water out of buildings and out of the roads. So lots of really unique buildings. We also get some new unique buildings. So first up, we have the Pyramid of Safety. The way that you get this building is to actually have a disaster without any casualties. That's easy to do. Create a small area with very few people, evacuate it, and have a low-level disaster occur. And we'll talk in the next episode about how to have low-level disasters. We also have the Meteor Park. You get this by experiencing a meteor strike. Pretty straightforward. Next is the Disaster Memorial. You get this by just experiencing a tsunami, a thunderstorm, a meteor strike, a sinkhole, a tornado, an earthquake, and a forest fire. All of them. Next, you get the Sphinx of Scenarios. So you get this by beating 3 scenarios. Speaking of scenarios, you unlock the sparkly unicorn rainbow park, which some people really love because of, it's very difficult to unlock, so not many people have it. You get this by winning the 5 natural disasters scenarios that come with this DLC. So you get 5 new scenarios with this DLC, which is pretty exciting. And then finally, we have the Helipark. And you get this by constructing each of the helicopter depots, police, medical, and fire. So pretty straightforward to get that one. Now, if you unlock all of these unique buildings, what you will get is a monument. And that monument is the Doomsday Vault, but you have to unlock all of them, which means you need the sparkly unicorn rainbow park. Now, it basically is a large Doomsday Vault. It's a higher capacity vault, huge upkeep, huge cost, very exclusive. So if you're into that, that might be something that you're interested in. So let's go ahead, and the very first thing I want to do is I want to create a small area that we're going to use is kind of a test bed for some of these different disaster buildings. So I was looking at this area right here. What we're going to do is create a little suburb right here. So we created a collector right here, and we're going to basically connect into that. Create an interchange right here and connect right over. So let's start out by looking at our terrain. You can see that we've got some challenging terrain, to say the least. So let's pop into here. I'm going to use my level terrain tool. I want this to basically be a bridge over here. We'll level this. I think that's pretty straight across. We're good. And then we'll come right across with our collector. Ideally. There we go. Now we're going to need to get down from here, and that's going to be a bit of a challenge. We should give ourselves some space. So what we're going to do, we'll turn our terrain view on. I will go into the budget menu again, apparently. Let's make this a little bit bigger. Right mouse click up here. And what I'm going to do is connect this road right here. We'll loop around. So I want to pull from right here, and we'll give ourselves some space. And we can attempt to soften this after we build this. You can see it's quite the slope. So let's go ahead. We have all of our snap twos on, not a problem. We'll just follow our terrain that we've created just to work our way down here. Now, I'll go into the budget menu again and let's smooth some of this out. So you can even come down here, just slope up, right mouse click, come to the bottom, slope up, and then you can create a nice, really gentle curve. Now you got to be careful with it because if you get too close to the road, you'll get those lumpies and bumpies. Alternatively, you could come in here, just pop up, and come in with your slope terrain tool, just a little bit slower. And I want this to occur fairly quickly, so I'm just going to keep popping through using my slope terrain tool, and then I'll feather it after the fact. You got to be careful, make sure that you are pulling the soil towards the place you initially clicked, otherwise you'll get a bunch of nastiness that you're not going to want to deal with. There we go. That's looking pretty good. This is a good starting place to start feathering some of this out, making it look a little bit nicer. There we go. And now I can just touch up some areas that got a little bit too close, pull it out a little bit, and soften this. Looking very good. There we go. Now I'm going to pull. We've got this as an arterial. I think I'm going to take this down a notch. We'll make this a collector right here. We'll leave it an arterial in the center so we get the extra turn lanes. And then we'll come right back to collector. Now I know that I want to send this out here, but I want to respect the topography and ensure that I'm coming in at the place where I'm going to need to remove the least amount of soil possible. So I'm going to create my straight line there, then I'll use my road guidelines, use my curved road tool, find that center guideline, and make a nice turn. Now we're going to come through here. We'll pick the height that we want to maintain. So that's right here. Right mouse click there, pull this straight through. There we go. That's nice. Now I like to always keep my terrain view on so that I don't make a mistake with my terrain. Now you can see that there's a bowl here. I could just run straight across and completely disregard the terrain. That's an option. Or I could loop this back around and try to use this. And that's what we're going to do. So here's what I would like to try. Let's take this and we will make a path for ourselves. There's no problem with that. You should be pre-grading things. That's the way that you make everything look as nice as it can. Now here, I want to figure out what terrain line we're going to use. So I'm going to use one from over here. We'll just pull that through. I could have certainly dropped this down, but I'm okay filling in a bit. And I think that these are pretty similar. So I'll right mouse click over here, start here. Look at that, just about the same. So we picked a terrain height that is suitable. And what I'm going to do is all of this crazy lumpy bumpiness, the game does very poorly with that. So I'm going to just raise this up just a little bit here. No problem with that. And the nice thing is, because we're a little bit lower, it's kind of like berming. I like that idea. And I think it would be totally natural if you wanted to save some money on sound walls, which are very expensive, very controversial. People don't like them. The DOTs, Departments of Transportation, do not like building them. Berm. People like berms. So berming is basically just having building an embankment on the side of a road to hide it. Now I did that a little bit on the other side of the highway, and we could continue doing that now. So I'm just going to follow this terrain line that I've created. I'm going to try to go straight as often as I can. That's just a personal preference. If we do add any buildings to this in the future, it'll make it look just a bit nicer. Now here, looks like I missed a bit of this. We'll smooth this out some. Then again, we'll follow this terrain line. And then we'll use our curved road tool to finish this off. Find that guideline, click there. Nice connection. You wouldn't be able to tell which side I started on. Really like this. That looks good. So I want to get our population to 105,000. So I'm going to build a small community over here. Lots of demand for commercial and industrial, very little demand for residential. So something to keep in mind, and we will try to do that. So we've got a bit of a donut here. Not a donut, but a hole. I want to make it more extreme. We're going to try to create a unique atmosphere in this area. So we're going to create an artificial lake. We have the ability to do that now. So I'm following those terrain lines roughly. Let's say we want to make it even more unique. We'll just have it jet out here a little bit. And I'm going to create some ridges by going just a bit deeper in. This will help contain the water. Otherwise, you might have flooding issues. And there we go. So if you're going to create a lake, I highly recommend that you remove the landscaping. It will die, but it'll still remain there if you don't. Now, bushes are probably not that big of a deal, but let's try to keep this as clean as we can. Now, regarding landscaping, the other thing you might want to think about is if you want to have something on the sides, let's say one of the things you could do is just kind of come and cover this up. It's much easier to do this before there's water in here than after. So why don't we just add that right now? Now, we could just fill this in and call it a day and it'll be just fine. Or we could do something else, and that something else could be create another layer of depth. So let's go ahead. We'll sync this. This is the right mouse button. That is how you go down. Left mouse goes up. So we could sync that down. And then I will grab the center with my right mouse button, and we'll just add a slightly deeper area. This will change the color of the water. So I like that because I think it makes it look a little bit more natural. And you can make that as stark a change as you want. You could even add more landscaping down here, or you could decide what we need are some rocks. And you want to have some large rocks kind of coming up from the end. Or something even more extreme in the center. Now do keep in mind, some of these have landscaping that will stay there. It's kind of weird. They'll also, that will interact with the water. So that is a consideration as well. So that could be a problem depending on what you're doing. And you see that it looks like most of these have landscaping around it. So things to keep in mind. So we'll get rid of these. I'll add that one. There's no trees. We've got rocks and we've got a little bit of moss around it or some random vegetation. That's fine. We can deal with that. All right. So the next thing I want to do is we're going to add a water outlet. Now you could put this on the side, and where that blue circle is where the water is going to fall. Now I've heard that you can put this in the center and let it get filled in. So I'm going to do that. In fact, in this particular location, I'm going to sink it down, and then we'll move it so it falls even further. So hopefully you can't see this at all. We'll come back through and modify the terrain a bit more. Now, when you're creating water bodies, there's a couple of things to keep in mind. First of all, we're gonna have to turn this on and off if we want this to not flood. So that is not ideal. And there is evaporation in the game. So that's a consideration. So you're gonna need to you can't just turn it on once, remove that and let it go away. Your lake will slowly die. So you could try to find an equilibrium where evaporation and this pumping line up. That'll be very difficult to do. You're probably going to pump more water in. The way that I generally advise dealing with this would be to have this outlet somewhere to create a river. This is not the ideal place to create a river. We could, even here, we can't do that. So we're going to have to play with this one, something to keep in mind. So I'm going to send this right out. We'll need to fix this later and get it underneath our road where it belongs. But we'll start out right here doing that. There we go. And now let's create our small community around this lake. So I'm going to come by with some small local roads. Let's just follow a terrain line. Find that you get a fairly natural development. Something that doesn't look all 100% gridded if you do this. That road's not perfect, but it's perfectly fine. So I will come through here as well, and we'll just send this road back here, and then have another one right here. And then to maximize our density around this body of water, we'll just add a cul-de-sac back here. And then let's think about some of our pedestrian connections as well, and plan this thing in a very thorough way. So we're kind of creating a little resort community here. And you see this is already filling in with water, even though it doesn't have power, which I think is fascinating. So I did not know that that was going to happen. You learn something new. It wants power, but it doesn't need it. We're going to need some sort of access to this area. So let's turn our snap tubes back on, and I will just create a collector connection right in here. Should look at our terrain. It's fine. Right there. There we go. Little cul-de-sac. Pretty awful. What are you going to do? It gives us the opportunity to connect in, and that's what we're really looking for at this point. There we go. Now we need power here as well, so let's get some power lines. I'm going to turn just my grid on. I find that that is the easiest way to connect them. And let's start it right here. And then I'll just find the ends of these, connect up. And it's a power line, so we can go wherever we want. We're going to turn our angle on, just go straight across the highway, and then cut back across here. There we go. Very, very nice, or very fine. Maybe that's the way of putting it. We're going to have a little commercial node here, and then we'll have homes throughout basically the rest of this. Even though that's not what our demand meter wants, it's fine. We're going to do it. It will survive. We'll have a couple more nodes of commercial activity, and then the rest will basically be residential. Now we could get very particular about this, and we will in certain areas, particularly on what will be our coast. But for the most part, I'm gonna just zone all of this. There we go. So now we've got this started, and you'll start to see our little city growing up around it. So we might want to think about how we're going to serve this with emergency services. So here's what we're going to do. Let's first create a district, and I'm going to set a policy here. Now this policy is going to be related to emergency services. So with the disasters DLC, you get 5 new policies. The very first one is helicopter priority. Now I can set this if I only want helicopters to serve this area with, fire, medical, and police coverage. We're going to do that just to see how it works. I wouldn't see this as a very rational thing in this particular area, but if you're creating a rural mountain village, maybe it is the perfect option for you. We also get a few other options under city planning. So we get lightning rods. Now this is a policy that you should probably apply to your entire city. This will add lightning rods to your tallest buildings, and the consequence of that will be that if you have a lightning storm, you might not have the damage you would otherwise have because the lightning will be attracted to those lightning rods. Next, you have VIP area. Now, this could be used in 2 separate ways. If you want to micromanage your disaster recovery efforts, you could create neighborhoods throughout your entire city and shelters within those areas that serve just those areas. And if you did that, this would be a great policy to apply citywide because it would keep people to those areas, not going into different shelters. You could also use this if you had a very exclusive neighborhood. You could add this, and that would be very beneficial for you as well, because you could ensure that only residents of that exclusive neighborhood can use that shelter. I'm going to apply that here. We'll say that this is a fairly exclusive area. We'll look at the policies for Franklin Square, and we'll have VIP area. We can also turn on fast recovery if we wanted to. But what this is going to do is if we have a disaster and we have the disaster response building, which is a building I didn't talk about, but I will talk about that in just a moment. Instead of looking for survivors, they'll just make it so that the building can rebuild, which can be a problem if you don't want to lose a whole bunch of population, but maybe it's desirable if you have a large city and only one disaster response unit. No rebuilding is another thing that you could apply citywide if you want to really micromanage disaster recovery efforts. You'd have to go manually building by building and bulldozing them yourself to be able to recover from a disaster. So lots of interesting policies that you get with this, and you could certainly do with it what you like. So let's come through here. We now have our VIP area, so when we place a shelter, only people in this area will be able to use the shelter. We could also have, well, we have no rebuilding, so we'll have to manually go through here and control recovery efforts. So we're going to come through, and because we have this policy on, even if I have a police station right here or a fire department right here, it won't serve this area. We're going to need some helicopters. So let's add some. Now you can see that my fire coverage now extends to the trees and it's poor all over the place. But we can fix this by adding in some of these disaster recovery services. So let's do that. Let's look for a flat place. Right here, I'm going to add a service road. Just a small frontage road. And what I'm going to do is add each one of these helicopter depots. You could spread these out, absolutely, and I would recommend it. You should have multiple of these if you have a large city, most likely. I'm going to just add them all right here so we can take a look at them and get a feel for their size because they're very large. So here we have a police helicopter depot. This is a fire helicopter depot. I'm realizing after the fact, I forgot to mention one of the most important things that go with the fire helicopter depot. So you also need to place a fire wire watchtower, or you should anyway, because when you place a fire watchtower, what you'll notice is that the range of your fire coverage is dramatically improved. This is again impacted by height, so be aware of that. But as you place these, you'll see that your fire coverage dramatically improves as you place these. Look at that. Much, much better. Now we could do even better if we had more fire helicopter depots, but that is for a later date. And this is a medical helicopter depot. They all need water and power. So let's take care of that right now. Now I talked a little bit about jumping the power. So we're going to try that out. So here's what I'll do. I'll come into here and I'll look at the earthquake sensor. And what we can do, go into our power menu, try to find the perfect place to put this. Now, I don't think that placing this near a highway would be a great idea in reality. The rumble from the highway would be bad, but look, if we want this to jump, we are now able to do that. And if we wanted it to feel really realistic, we could send a road back there. I'm going to send a path. We'll say that this is a maintenance path for maintenance vehicles. There we go. They can reach that. All is well. Power jumped. No need for a power line. And we have this. This will function just fine. Detection range 2,000 meters. And we can test that in a little while. But I wanted to place these first. So what this is going to do, these are all going to serve this area. You're not going to see any emergency response vehicles in here. And every single disaster will be covered by those buildings. Now, look at this. Okay. We've got to finish off our water pipes here. We don't have any pipes in the center. And then we're going to have to wait for power to jump. I'm going to fudge it just for a little bit. We'll connect this here. Get people moving in. You see that this is slowly filling in. Looking very good. Liking the way that this is turning out. So we've got more disaster buildings. And we need a shelter here. In fact, we need shelters all over the place. So I'm going to place... I'm assuming that this will be about a couple thousand population at build out, maybe only 1,000. Why don't we add a shelter here? And I'll see if there's a place that's not quite as valuable, probably in here. We'll add our shelter. Everyone loves that. And you can see that where shelter coverage is very poor at this point. It's just there. So let's place a couple of larger shelters. This is 10,000, so we know that we need 10 of these throughout the city. So if we wanted to completely cover our city, we're going to use a whole bunch of eminent domain and place shelters. Now I want to place these in areas that have good access to the arterial network because that will spread the coverage. If you wanted to get very specific about this and you had neighborhoods all over, you could click on these. See that in this neighborhood, Emerson Square, that's 5,000. This right here, Highland Square, 72. Spruce District, 3,900, Crescent Heights. So I would assume that this area probably actually needs 2. We don't have anything over here covering this area, any neighborhoods, but I would assume that that's what you need. So you could get very specific about this. Very, very specific. And you can kind of see the coverage. We can extend that and we will, but not right now. Not right now. Let's add this right here. I would prefer not to have this directly on an arterial. That said, these are only going to have things going to it during a disaster, so maybe it's not the end of the world. And these do need water coverage. And the primary reason for that is that they're actually going to take water in and store it within here. So these they're very expensive, and they have large water and power needs. So that's something to keep in mind. You also have the ability to create disaster evacuation routes. And I would recommend you do this to ensure that you can pick people up in case of a disaster. So what I'm going to do here is just create a route. I'm going to try to divide this evenly between these two areas. So this is just like drawing a bus route. So there's nobody here, but I know that there are people over here. I'm wondering, can I click into here? Nope, I cannot. So let's go in here. We'll draw that route, and we'll just need to understand and remember where our people were. Then again, people could be at the office when a disaster occurs. So you want to get these everywhere because you just never know where people are. And folks can drive to this, but that might not be your best option. The other thing is you'd want to create a logical route if you could. There's a lot of cul-de-sacs here, and that makes this a very challenging area to serve. That's one reason I don't like cul-de-sacs. But that's just a planning thing generally. I don't like cul-de-sacs. I think that if you talk to many planners, there are benefits of them. There are also many detriments, and those detriments include difficult to serve with city services. Then you got to complete your route. They begin and end at the shelter. So something to keep in mind. Same thing here. Now this one has sewage backing up, which to me means that we don't have enough sewage treatment. That is a bummer. Let's take care of that right now. We've got a couple of these right here. We just add one more. Where I just cut this off. Where I added this power line rather. We'll look at our terrain. We can make that work. There we go. That will be a pretty substantial benefit to us. So we're going with the exact same thing that we've been using, the Eco Advanced Inland Water Treatment Plants. And our city is so big, this actually isn't a huge benefit to us. Let's speed this up for a second and see what it does. It looks like we jumped just barely. We've got a lot of water in this city to process. So that should open up the ability for us to create a route here. You can see that there's food that's stored in here, water, power, and those are all important considerations. That's why it costs so much and it consumes so much. So here, let's go ahead. We'll just kind of loop through here again. This may not be the most efficient, and you might find efficiencies in having the smaller shelters in that it's a little bit easier to serve some of these areas. You could have smaller routes. So there you go. Disaster routes, they cover this whole area. Those will be very slow routes, but we are providing some options. Now, it's important to keep in mind that's not going to change your coverage. Just kind of, you know that it's going to help when you evacuate. And hopefully you've provided enough disaster response buildings that you're getting enough warning in advance. So let's place some of our other disaster buildings. So we'll come in to our disaster menu, and we're right by the water. So why not have some buoys? So you can't place these outside of your city limits. That is a limitation. It's unfortunate. These don't need power, so keep that in mind. You can place these basically anywhere, as long as it's in your city limits. I'd love to place one out here, just won't let me do it. And there shouldn't be a tsunami coming from the river down there, so those two are probably as good as it gets for us. So coming into our earthquake sensors, look at this area. So we place that one sensor, it draws a bubble around the 2,000 meters, and we know that we need some more. So we could place one right here. I like this because maybe it helps us jump that power. Let's see. You see the coverage pick up right there, and now our power jumps. So we should be able to get rid of these power lines. Perfect. Double duty right there. That is a win, a double win. We like that. We like that. So right here, we'll do something similar. We're going to just hide this underneath this cable car. You can't zone there, so why not hide that? And then we'll add one over here. Now these are they're very inexpensive and have a very small upkeep. So don't be shy about using these and getting coverage to be good all over the place. They're also very small, so you can sneak them in. And they are not impacted by vibrations around it, so something to keep in mind. We'll sneak one in this park as well. Now we have some sort of coverage throughout our entire community. So we've got our tsunami coverage. You can't see the coverage of these, they just work. I want to place a disaster response unit now. So this is another helicopter building, interestingly. So what we're going to do here, let's hop out of here. And what we're going to do is place this in our downtown area. Now, this is a very government-y looking building, which is why I like it in the downtown. It's also huge. So something else to keep in mind, we are going to need to destroy blocks of city to make this fit in. And our grid actually isn't ideal to sneak this in place. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to get rid of all of these roads right here, and we're going to redevelop this entire area around our disaster response building. So we will sneak that in down here. And then I'm going to redevelop this. I want to maximize our developable land. So we'll add that right here. We're going to increase the density of this entire area and rezone everything around it. But before we do that, let's add in some paths, and I want some paths that terraform. We didn't look at the terrain here. We didn't respect our topography, and we are now suffering as a result. So let's go ahead and try to cover up our mistakes and our sins, and we'll use some of these terraforming paths. There we go. We can work with that. We can cover some of that up. We'll do the exact same thing here. I'm going to completely freeform this one. We'll make our connection. That is just atrocious to look at. I should have just done the right thing, which is come in here. We're going to call a mulligan, and let's get this fixed by going into the budget menu again. You can see I've destroyed a bus route too, so all things to keep in mind. I made a mess of this entire area. Deeply regretful of that. And it's just not going to work there because of the height of the road. So we're going to need to rethink everything we just did. And I'll place that down into this bowl. That'll at least keep this building looking acceptable. And maybe we can reestablish this road here. Very nice. We'll get rid of this connection. I'm going to run this down. We'll connect right there. I like that. That's much better. We can have a pedestrian connection or even another road. Now it's well connected. So here, I could certainly run another road up, and I think I'm going to. Hopefully that fixes some of these bus routes that I've destroyed. It does, kind of. It provides a place to loop, which is probably not ideal. I'm just going to remove those stops altogether. And we'll establish them here next to the tram. That'll be a benefit to this area. Now, we can redo our zoning around here. And let's resolve some of the demand that we have in this area. There we go. So maybe it's not ideal to live right next to this thing, but it's only really going to disturb you when there's a disaster anyway, or a big fire and the building is collapsed. It'll resolve it then. So there we go. This building is absolutely essential when you have the disasters DLC. Without this, you're going to end up in situations where you can't rebuild certain buildings, such as your unique buildings. You're going to absolutely want to have this in your city. Okay, so now that we have that, we also have our radio masts. These, you can take a look right now. Our radio coverage is low. Now I've brought in another DLC temporarily to show you why I like these. So right here, you can see that because they have wires, you can put these in some really unique locations. They do not need to have road access. And you can see they're huge. They do need to have power though. And they're very particular about the power location. So right here, if you don't have power connecting directly to that little building down there, it's not going to work. And we had another thing sneak in. These are our Clearwater County trains, and they're extra long. So if you see these, that's why they're in. Very sorry. They will not be in the next one. Look at that. Just an outstanding building. Now, I wanted to show these. You might have caught that this was in here before. Concerts. So the reason why I'd like to have this in there is you get the media broadcasting company. And I feel like these two buildings together, radio masts and the broadcasting company are absolutely outstanding. So let's go ahead and we'll do what is pretty terrible. Well, it won't even let us do it. I was thinking of crossing the road. It's not going to allow it to happen because it's such a tight angle. We'll do something equally unrealistic. We'll add a road here. Let's add in our media broadcasting company. Temporarily, we're going to take this out because we're going to introduce this down the line. And then if you come in here with this short radio mast, or even a tall one, look at that. It comes with this small little radio tower right there, but this feels like it's a radio tower. I love that. And there are more things that you could do with this. So oftentimes along highways, you will see these things just lining up, providing cell service. Now you don't have cell phone service in the game, but doesn't it kind of feel like it? We could add this right here. It won't disrupt people all that much. They like it. And now when you're on the highway, you get that appearance. Feels good to me. I like it. So you can go with whichever you like. Obviously, the height of the mast is going to have a significant it's a determining factor in how far the coverage will go. So that's something to keep in mind. The other thing to keep in mind is that terrain heights do matter with this. So if I were to place this right here, for instance, let's say I place a short one back here, the coverage it provides is going to be relatively modest. This is maybe not the best demonstration area. Let's try one more. Let's go right here. And let's turn, well, no, we'll leave this. And what you're going to see is the coverage is not uniform. There are places where it's not providing service because of the terrain. So those are things to keep in mind. You might want to place these in your tallest parts of your city, because if you're going to do that, you're going to have better coverage throughout your community. So let's say I place it up there. Look at it, provided coverage way out there. It's pretty impressive. Just kidding. It didn't provide coverage way out there, but it provided additional coverage as opposed to placing it at the bottom of the hill. So things to keep in mind. Now I just noticed something. I'm seeing some flooding. And what that means is that we've got to turn this thing off. So our lake is totally full. We're now killing our little community. We're losing population. That's no good. How do we resolve that? Well, we have our pumping service now. So let's sneak this in back here. So the pumping service is in the water menu, and you can place this wherever you'd like. I believe the terrain here is inappropriate. It is. Let's add it back here. Now this will generate a significant amount of traffic when there's a flooding event. We're going to place this right here. We've got to connect our water directly to it. And we're going to provide an outlet. Otherwise, everyone's going to head down there. And I chose this location for a couple of reasons. We are going to create some ramps here. Nothing extreme. Ooh, nothing like that. That's extreme. Let's go ahead and get that bridge fixed and then add some ramps. So I just added a node there so I could have the bridge structure go all the way across. And the game is not a fan. Space is already occupied. It's trying to place that pillar right in the center. So I'm going to allow that to happen. We're going to set that manually. And then we'll bring that across. There we go. That will get rid of our tearing issue. And it will provide us a nice place to connect in for our ramps. We're going to use our slope tool. Do something fairly modest. And we don't really have the ability to go over here. So what we're going to do is circle back around right here. And we'll level this. And this won't be the perfect interchange, but it's going to be just fine. So we'll come through here. I'm going to use dirt roads. I think ideally we would come right here. But due to some of the struggles that we're going to have with our terrain, we'll come through right here. No, we're going to do it. So just a simple ramp. It's a very awkward location, so I think it's okay to have an awkward ramp. And then we'll get this upgraded. And if you wanted to get onto the highway, you could do it right here. Signalized to get you down, come back up, get off. You don't have a way to get down here. Sometimes that is the case that you just won't see that. Other times you want to have that. So you have multiple ways to get on and off the highway. We're going to do that. This is a pretty ugly ramp. It's very steep, but we're space constrained due to our existing terrain and roadway network. So we're just going to leave that and call it good. We could certainly slope this. I would encourage you to do that, but this isn't an intersection building tutorial, so I'm just going to create something simple. There we go. Very ugly. We've got a bump here that I cannot stand. We're going to try to fix that. There we go. Much better. It'll work. It's not perfect, but we're not going to let perfect be the enemy of good in this particular case. Let's go ahead and perform a little bit of vanilla traffic management on this as well. And I'll leave the signals here. This is technically a collector arterial junction, so that would be a benefit. And then we're going to zone in this area as well, because we want to make sure that we are getting our population up as we always do. This is a real struggle. I was going to connect these roads. We're not going to because of the terrain heights. We'll just accept this as is. And these will just be cul-de-sacs back here as well. Not a huge concern. We can live with it. There's already water pipes. Perfect. We'll just leave that as is. So now we've got some of this, and you can see our water levels are dropping. It'd be really great if there was a way to handle this automatically, but you can't really without mods. Now, one of the nice things about having the water here is you're seeing it right now. This fire helicopter is actually coming down, grabbing the water out of here and using it to put out fires. Because we have fire spreading on, fires are hopping from building to building. So that is a concern. That is certainly a concern. So we're going to actually remove that policy. We see how it works. That's great. But we don't need that policy in this particular area. And I think it's actually detrimental. You will still see fire helicopters helping out if you don't have that policy on. So you don't need to have that again under services and helicopter priority. So now, even if we don't put anything in this area, you're seeing police cars come in. We're going to see fire helicopters. It's going to work just great. So there we go. Things are looking good here. We can get rid of these power lines. We've got more emergency services to put in. Now, I didn't blanket the entire city and all of the emergency services. You're going to do that in a time lapse in the next one before we unlock everything. So next, we've got our weather radar. This covers the entire city, so it doesn't really matter where you put it. That said, there are better locations for this just based on reasonableness. And what we're going to do is we're going to grab a dirt road, send it up here. We'll respect our terrain heights. And let's get to the top of this mountain and we'll put our deep space radar and we will put our weather station up here. Now, I would highly recommend grading these switchbacks if you're going to do it. You'll get a much better result, but you can certainly do it by being meticulous. That's what I'm going to try to do right now. Don't go down too fast. If you have mods and yet you're using a mod like Node Controller, you don't need to pre-grade any of this. I guess if you don't want to, you can. But you don't have to. And at this, if we were doing these switchbacks, we would probably want to make sure that around the corner is level and we're dropping our terrain in the flat spots. Let's do that. So there we go. Now we have a road going up here. Not beautiful, but it's fine. We could certainly detail this out if we wanted to, but I really just wanted to be able to get up here. So we're going to look at our terrain. It's fairly flat. We can do even better if we want to. And in fact, we are going to. And now we'll place our deep space radar up here and our weather station. Between the two of these to make our power connection, we're going to use our earthquake sensor. Bridges the power. And we can do the exact same thing to get all the way down the mountain if we wanted to. I'm going to do a little bit of that, but we're going to do a little bit more as well. Try to avoid some of that. So we'll run actually, maybe I'll just run this up the back end. And then we'll need some power or some water lines as well. There we go. Nice connection through the park. And now we've got water. For some reason, I have not made this power connection. Alternatively, I could also go ahead and just do something like this. Maybe that's the best solution up here, rather than having all these crazy power lines. Although I'm sure that this would disrupt a little bit of what's happening here. So something to keep in mind. Maybe this isn't the height of realism, but it is working. And ultimately for some of these, maybe that's what your ultimate goal is, not have power lines all over the place. We could also daisy chain these earthquake sensors. They're very inexpensive and you could just have a line of them down. It's another option. Otherwise you can get a mod. Either way. And you see how fast this thing is depleting. So it's certainly a problem. We're gonna have to turn this on and off and keep an eye on it. Another way that we could deal with this a little bit is we could just certainly go ahead and put this ugly thing right here and suck water right out of the place that we're adding it. And I'm curious, this actually is probably problematic because it's going to suck more water out than we're pumping in there, and then it's empty and it creates noise. We're going to do it for the time being just to see what happens. Sometimes you just got to experiment and have a little bit of realism. We'll get rid of the house right there. We don't want any water pipes underneath the house. That's not where they belong. So now we essentially could leave this, I believe. The main issue that we're going to have is that we're going to suck a ton of water out of here. So you see it's creating a current, it's sucking it out. This won't always produce as well as it probably should. We could certainly come through here and add another one of these. You see that because there's water, I can only put it on the shore now. So if you want it underwater, you got to make sure this is totally empty first. And you can see that it's starting to recede now. And that's a problem because the water has an impact on our land values. So we're going to have a negative impact on our land values here because it won't always have water. So things to keep in mind. But if you want to do this, this is certainly a way you can accomplish that look. And we could have sunk this down even lower. You know, we could have tried something like this. Let's pause this for just a moment. Let's remove this and see if we can sink this thing down. And now I will put some of our largest trees around here to try to hide this. And we'll pull our terrain up a bit around it. Not really a great way to do this in vanilla, unfortunately. And I think that this is a good demonstration of those issues. And you can see we're draining 100% of the water from here now, which is not at all what we wanted to do, but that is occurring because now this is deeper and all the water is flowing there. This produces 2,400 cubic meters a week. This sucks in 5 times that. So that's a problem. That is a problem. So the way that we could resolve that would certainly be to mess with our terrain heights again, get this to be a higher terrain height where the input is occurring. And as long as we go a little bit higher than this, we can at least get the water to stay in here a little bit. There now, ideally this will act as a relief valve, not empty out our entire water body. So that is our goal. We've tried to hide it. It's ugly. I wish these were smaller. They're not. So now at least this will fill back up. It'll fill up at this height. Then as it starts to go up, it will suck it out. So that will be helpful. Lots of money to do this, but in vanilla, your options are limited. So you do what you can with what you have. And now we need to get our population up. We've placed a number of our disaster buildings, all of them actually. So at this point, even though we haven't covered our entire city with everything, I want to build up our population. So I'm going to build this area out. We're going to look at our terrain, use our terrain and let that be our guide, and create a roadway network through here. We'll use some eminent domain to find some ways out of this neighborhood, out of this cul-de-sac. Okay, so this is very suburban in character. We need to add some of our city services to this area because we've added basically nothing at this point. So let's get on that. So death care, we'll add some health care. Again, I'm adding these close to the collectors, but not directly on them. And there we go. We've added a couple of things around here, raised up our land values. Now let's fill this place in. I am going to change things up just slightly with our power lines, considering we no longer need to go all the way in, and now I can zone all the way up here. adding some commercial along the collectors, as you would routinely see in a suburban area. And a very suburban layout here. Just trying to ensure that none of the local roads are used for cut-through. Some of them do make connections, but funnel most of this traffic onto the collector. That is about as suburban as it gets. And now that we've got this little area here, what I think we're going to do is focus a little bit on our industrial demand, because that's really what's holding our city back at this point. So I am going to create a small kind of suburban office center over here as well. So what we'll do, we'll just loop one of those back here. Not very walkable, not exactly the point. So for better or for worse, it just kind of is a layout that occurs. And with that, I think we're going to let this go for just a minute and get this area filled in. Okay, so we're almost exactly back to where we were at the start of this. So what I'm going to do now is build another little office park and fill in some commercial along this collector, at least where we know we're not going to develop any more, because at this point, I think we're reaching saturation in terms of our availability, or our ability to develop this land here. Mostly because we don't have enough commercial or industrial / office. Okay, so I've gone through and added some pedestrian connections. I should have done this up front, not the height of realism to add pedestrian connections after the fact, but in a suburban area, you will routinely either see none or see many. And I'm going to choose, in this case, to have many. There we go. So now, even if this is suburban and kind of disconnected, at least you'd be able to get around on foot. The trips might be kind of long, but it could be significantly worse. Okay, and with that, some quick and dirty landscaping. You can see that this is shaping up to be a suburban community. So I think that we should end it here. We've reached our population milestone. We've had no significant disasters. We've created our own little artificial lake. It is sustainable. We found a way to make it happen. And things are looking up. In the next episode, things won't be looking up. Things will be looking tough. So I hope that you've enjoyed this. If you did, please hit the like button. If you aren't subscribed, please consider doing so. And I will end this with a brief city tour. Take care. Bye-bye.